Aloha mai kākou. Welcome to another taping of our Naleo Kaiulu series, where we're engaging in a talk story session with our community members who are working in transforming Hawaii's food systems. So I'm going to be your host, Matthew Kekoalau, and joining me today is Bryan Mayer. And this is all a part of a larger project we're working on, which is the Huakaʻi ʻIke ʻAina project, where we are working on exploring experiential, enhancing our experiential education. So yeah, thank you, Bryan, for joining us today. And I'm just going to have a talk story with you and hear more about your work, particularly in animal husbandry and butchery. But let's start off with, tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Sure.
Like where where are you from? Where are you coming from? How did you engage in this work that you're doing in butchery?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. First off, yeah. I don't know how much time do we have to talk about how it all started.
Probably not nearly long enough. Yeah.
I kind of fell into it. I had a career before in music for quite a long time, and then a brief stint in the business world. I have a degree in economics and finance, which kind of just, I think, showed that I could open up a book and study and sit in college classrooms for a little while. But I kind of fell into it. I saw my music career kind of ending, and it was great while it lasted. But I felt that I still needed to do something with my hands and still needed to connect with people. And came from a very stereotypical New York Italian family, cooked a lot with family. And I was walking down the street past this grocery that was just opening up, and a friend said, "You should go in there and see if they have any openings." And I walked in and said, "I have zero experience, but I work really hard." They said, this was a Friday, they said, "Come in on Monday." And then that Monday, and here I am 20 something years later. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So about how old were you when you like grabbed that job in that butcher shop?
Oh, gee, like 30 something. Yeah. So definitely not a youngster at that point. But I think I had such a great role model in my father. He recreated himself anew, and I just felt like I had, again, such a great role model to follow this reinvention of myself. I worked really hard, but I was also in the right place at the right time, especially in the butchery world, and especially being in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the name of the butcher shop? Just curious.
So it was a little gourmet grocer called The Green Grape in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. This little corner street, and it had everything that like a little gourmet grocer had. It had a fish counter, which is where I started with fish.
Started on fish.
I started on fish with a guy named Rob Fishman, of all names. Very appropriate, right? And then there was a prepared foods counter, and then a cheese counter, and I did a little bit of all of that. And one day the butcher didn't show up. Which is, maybe how those things go a lot of the time in the food world. And so the manager just said, "You got this, right?" And that wasn't a question. So I said, "Yeah." And, I knew nothing about butchery, really. I had watched a little bit, and I went downstairs into the walk-in. And back then, everything was box. Everything came in boxes. It was all box meat. There was no real whole animal butchery that was happening in stores, really. Certainly not in the U.S. And I put Post-it notes over everything. So it was just like skirt steaks and hanger steaks and ribeyes and straight, because I didn't know what anything was. And I probably mislabeled the case when I set it all up, but I had the best time, and that was the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So then, I think, what brought you to kind of the work you do now? And by that I mean, I think you still very much are working in butchery, but I think a very kind of different part of what butchery is, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily standing behind a counter, right, with a bloody apron and a big knife,
Sure,
all the time. So they're in there, how did you go through that transition, going from behind the counter to the work you do now? And actually, can you, maybe that's better first, like kind of, can you describe kind of more of the work that where you moved through into doing kind of like more kind of food systems kind of oriented work from behind the counter?
Well, none of this, like back then, none of this really existed, right? Like people, you know, you still had, and again, in the US, I think, right? The continental US, you know, you had like small little butcher shops, but again, nobody was really doing what we did when we set out. And I don't think we even really knew what we were doing. I just kept thinking it was a fad. So I found myself going to the Hudson Valley, which is about 90 miles north of New York City, to this butcher shop called Fleischer's, which kind of became the sort of the epicenter, if you will, for like the craft butcher movement. So the craft butcher movement, I guess, would just be kind of taking these old world European techniques, whole animals, and really teaching how to go about that process. Yeah. Identifying muscles and seam butchery, and sort of less the way that the commodity system had gone, and more back to sort of an old world, more thoughtful process. And on top of that, we also became a proxy for the farmer. You know, this is pre-social media, right? This is early 2000s. Yeah. And so, you know, there wasn't a lot of folks out there kind of talking about these things, certainly not talking about farming on the level that we talk about now. None of this stuff was as ubiquitous as it was. And so we started teaching. People wanted to learn more about how to source, how to go talk to farmers and buy these animals, and then how to butcher them, how to sell them, how to make all these products with them, right? So not just filling a meat case, but how to make sausages and how to, you know, really use every bit of the animal, like really understanding the economics of it. And I just became a student of all of it. It just all fascinated me. So obviously the butchery, the art form, right? Understanding anatomy and biology, understanding the business side of it, understanding the recipe development and the cooking side of it, and then teaching it, which made me better at doing it. And then finding out that there were more and more people that wanted to learn how to do it. So not just chefs, right? Not just culinary professionals, but you know, your average person, right, that was now being introduced to this, right? So now we've got a little bit flash forward, now we've got some social media, we've got Instagram, people are posting things, and this information is being disseminated, you know, at a much quicker pace than it ever was before. And so, I don't know, we just kind of caught lightning in a bottle, I guess, and right place, right time, and just had an influx of these folks coming in. And then, you know, you started to see the industry grow, right, beyond the over-the-counter experience, right, where there was a need to go out and train more people. You know, farmers were looking at their farms, and a certain specific group of farmers, as more than just a place where they could raise animals. It was a place where they could educate and invite the community into. And so they were looking to maybe create a butcher experience or a restaurant experience, or they were looking to hold classes. So there's this whole kind of industry just kind of developed out of standing behind a counter and selling people meat in a way that had never, right? That had, you know, progressed from, you know, Sam the butcher or whomever. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you were like kind of, you know, I think sounds like at that time period when you were at, sorry, was it Fleischer's? Fleischer's. Yeah. Right, like you're Fleischer's, you're sort of like, kind of at that pivotal moment where the broader kind of food, like, I guess like culinary like transformations that are happening around that time, like people are getting more curious, right? People are, you know, connecting back to like, where does their food come from?
Exactly.
And wanting to know, where does their meat come from? Like folks like Alice Waters, right? Or, you know, I guess Dan Barber, right? Those kind of folks working in that space. And right, so it's like you kind of caught that wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were right there in New York, so right, like we worked with Stone Barns way back in the beginning, right? Like folks like Martha Stewart or Anthony Bourdain would come in. And so, you know, it didn't hurt that we happened to be right there.
Yeah, like right. And I mean, in the Hudson, right? It's not that far from New York City,
no.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I just want to touch on something because, you know, I think in our various conversations we've had, you know, you've mentioned kind of your background, right? Your educational background, right, was not in butchery, right? So can you talk a little bit about that and like, I guess how it like has prepared you kind of to work in that broader kind of sphere of what, like kind of where you went with your butchery activities?
Yeah, I guess, you know, I kind of look at it like it became a foundation for something a lot larger, right? So, you know, again, I have this degree, you know, I worked in accounting for 6 months. I worked for a firm before I decided that music was going to be my full-time career. But, you know, I worked in an accounting firm, and what a great foundation to go out into the larger business community, right? And have that background. So to me, it became this foundation. I had this platform, right? And I had risen to this certain level, right? I was at this place where it kind of gave me, you know, that platform and the ability to speak and some credibility, right, behind what I was doing. And so then I could go out into a much, you know, into the broader sustainable ag community, regenerative ag community now, whatever you want to call it, and speak on these things, you know, that were much bigger than just the art and the craft of butchery. It's really important to me to keep doing that. I feel like it gives me legitimacy. You know, I always say like, I'll always drag a knife, right? Because it's just that skill set. But, you know, a friend's parent said to me once that you'll hope that you rise to the level where you are, you know, more valuable for what you know than what you actually can physically do. And so I constantly try to, you know, I keep that mantra in my brain. I always want to be able to physically do what I do, but I'm getting older, you know, I'm not as fast as I once was, if I ever was. So yeah, but it's a great foundation. And I take that when I teach as well, right? If I'm I work with culinary students, and, you know, it's a great foundation to have. That doesn't mean that you have to be behind the line in a kitchen. You know, I took my butchery career and I turned it into a consulting career, and I turned it into a writing career, and you know, I've done some television stuff, and so I've tried to, you know, not say yes to everything, obviously. Like, you know, I'm very careful in the things that I say yes to, but really being open to, you know, where these things can take you. So again, when I talk to culinary students, it's not just about being on the line. It's, you know, do you want to write about food? Do you want to recipe develop, right? Do you want to work for something like that? Yeah. Do you want to farm, right? Like, what a great background to have, to understand what is going to be the ultimate use of the thing that you're growing, right? And
yeah.
So it's a valuable thing to have. Yeah.
Yeah, and now like you're doing more. I mean, you've been working in Hawaii for quite some time now, right?
Well, since 2018.
Yeah, well, maybe not quite that long,
yeah.
but you've been working for some time now. And I guess it would be. I'd like to know a little bit more. Hear you talk a little bit more about like the work you have been doing here.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe what brought you.
Sure.
And then the work you're doing here, and from that vantage point, it'd be nice for us to get into thinking about like where you see are kind of challenges and opportunities that you're working with right now in this area.
Yeah, I you know, I say this all the time. I could have, before 2018, I could have named maybe 10, 15, 20 places I thought I would be. I never thought I would be here, and now I can't imagine being anywhere else. It's incredible, and I feel so lucky and so blessed to be here. I met the folks that founded Kanoa Cattle Company in 2015. And we worked from afar for a while, and then finally in 2018, everything aligned, and I found myself out here working in Kapolei at the slaughter facility out there, looking at the cattle industry here, and not looking to change it, but looking to kind of incentivize ranchers, right, in a way that wasn't really done before. You know, Hawaii has a robust industry of sending cattle to the continent, right? And so that's always going to be something that happens, right? But, right, the need to keep animals back here to finish them, so we're not sending them to the continent, importing them back in and all that sort of thing. So one of the challenges was to incentivize ranchers to finish cattle here, which is an art form in and of itself. And we were getting really successful at it. I had a really great coworker, Ethan West, and we, I think we really started to help raise the bar along with our ranching partners on what Hawaii beef could be, what it could look like, what it could taste like, what chefs could do with it. And that was really exciting. New ownership came in and had some different ideas, and so I found myself kind of at this crossroads again. I was a little worried, right? Because it was the beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty, but I wound up connecting with the Maui Nui venison folks. And I had met them when I had first gotten out here, and we had talked a bunch, and Jake would call me with questions every now and then. And so about a week or so after I had left Kanoa, I got a call, said, "What are you doing? We could use some help. Do you want to come out here?" And, there I was, flying back and forth to Kauai during the middle of a pandemic, working with an invasive deer population and really starting to understand what that looked like, and the monumental task that Maui Nui venison has in front of them, but that the state has in front of them in terms of this sort of, in the environmental impact of those animals on Maui, Molokai. Yeah.
And we could spend a whole show talking about the issues with invasives and and that industry with the venison and axis deer.
And that's the really great thing too about being at the culinary school, is that part of the challenge for me is wanting to make things more interesting for the students, right? So, everybody cooks with beef, pork, and chicken, right? Maybe some lamb, but challenging myself to bring these invasive species to the table, for lack of a better term, and get students excited about working with venison, working with wild pig, because they're going to be the ones that are going to, turn the public onto that, right? Chefs have a very important role, right, in getting the public familiar with these things, right? And so this is like sort of the synergistic relationship, I think, between farmers and ranchers, hunters and trappers, chefs and butchers, and the public, right? I think it's like everybody has to get involved. Everybody's got to do their part.
Yeah, because part of that, right, is when you're a chef or when you're working in some kind of like retail butchery, right? Like it's a business, right? And you have to purchase products from someone, right? So there's supply chain challenges in there, and as much as we'd probably like to imagine that this can happen, it's like there are lots of, I think, sometimes good and bad kind of obstacles to going from a deer in the forest to like venison in a counter in a cold case.
Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah. Like the logistical challenges of working with something that's wild versus like a domesticated animal. Yeah, I mean the costs of doing those two types of businesses are so radically different. Yeah. Yeah,
and so I think not to take us totally into that topic, but I think I'd like to kind of zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit more about, I guess kind of from the framing of opportunities and like what excites you about the work that you're doing right now through the lens of us like having a food system that we're like joyful about eating, right, within. So what excites you right now? What are the kind of like in that space of opportunities you see for us to like step into?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing is that everybody is talking about it, right? So you have, the larger food community talking about it. You have elected officials and legislators talking about it, and you have a coming together of educators and legislators and the public, right, that understand that we have got to look at a way to reduce what we're importing and what we're also sending away. And that's going to require investment in infrastructure, right? And that's going to require an investment in training people, and that's going to require an investment in educating the public. That's going to require bringing on partners, right? Because chefs can only do so much, right? You know, in terms of moving the needle, right? It's pretty low, right? It's important, right? Optically, right? They have a huge audience. You know, we've got great chefs here, right? Like Robin and Ed and Gooch and all these folks that bring so much attention to all these issues. But the real move the needle stuff will hopefully eventually be partnerships with, you know, with hotels and resorts, right? Like looking at them and in terms of like, how can we help with this, maybe the optics of being less extractive, right, for lack of a better term, and more supportive of the infrastructure and the economy here. Well, what better way to do that than support local ranchers and farmers, right? And getting those products on the menus of those resorts, right? It's crazy that people fly, that their food probably travels a greater distance than they do getting here, right? It's not going to solve all the ills of tourism, right? But I think it can help. And then, you know, we're looking at like other institutions, right? We've got the DOE, right? And feeding our keiki more nutritious meals, right? That tastes good, right? And then that support, again, local farmers and local ranchers. And there's so many, right? There's so many aspects of this that I think are really exciting and that people are talking about, and that there's action. There's things that are moving ahead, which is really wonderful to see. Because I think, you know, it's not just here in Hawaii. We have a set of you know, things that make it more difficult here than maybe elsewhere, but also those are part of the advantage here, I think, in some ways. And I think that we absolutely have the opportunity to be leaders in looking at regional agricultural systems, regional production systems, like taking away from this, you know, sort of centralized, right, mass food production system, right, and looking at what that looks like on a micro level. Who better?
Yeah, hopefully. Could you go back and expand on what you were saying earlier? Like there are some like sticking points, right, that are maybe unique to Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
But I like you're kind of thinking about like, oh, well, these are also potentially things that we could use as a strength, or right, like a place for us to strongly pivot to something else. Could you talk about maybe one thing that stands out to you as one of those like kind of potential opportunities in there?
I think, well, it's super exciting, I think, what's happening in the sheep and goat world. And I'm a big proponent of smaller ruminants. Not that there's anything wrong with cattle, but they're big. They take up a lot of space. They're really important. Ruminants are absolutely important for our agriculture system and environment and health of the soil and all of that. Sheep and goat have the ability, though, to help with fire mitigation, invasive flora control, because they can eat things that are sometimes toxic to cattle.
Right. Or cows tend to be a bit pickier in what they eat too, right?
Very picky.
Yeah.
Can be. And then, you know, we have this growing solar industry here, right? So we are, and it's only going to get bigger. And sheep and goat are used to graze underneath those solar arrays, right? But we lack the infrastructure here on Oahu, right, to process and slaughter them for a bunch of different reasons, economic and not. And so what we're doing right now is doing a lot of feasibility work with some really intelligent, passionate folks about getting another facility built here on Oahu that I think can usher in a really robust sheep industry here in Hawaii. So I'm really excited about that.
Right. So like in there, not only are we getting like tasty food, right, like lamb, like meat, and milk and cheeses,
Sure.
and all that, but also they're grazing, taking out invasives, and grazing under photovoltaics and agrivoltaic systems, right? So that land is not, right, it's like using it more in, I guess, in a more diversified way,
it's
right?
multiple purposes, right? Like really, for lack of a better term, like just extracting all the value that you can from a parcel of land, right? In every way possible. Creating energy, right? Creating food, all the things that are important, right? That we don't have to import, which I think is the main thing, right? Reduce our need for imports. And so, and then again, right, like when you look at drought, you know, that's real. You know, whether it's going away or not, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But that's a real problem, and sheep and goat are an excellent way to mitigate against that in terms of what they can eat and how quickly they can. And so there's a group, Oʻahu grazers, Ryan and Dan Olson, doing some really great work grazing sheep for fire mitigation. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Well, the time goes really fast. So I wanted to start, moving us to close out our talk story together, and I think what I'd like to kind of ask you about is, in all your work, right? Like, hopefully you're eating some good food. Right?
I've had a few good meals.
Yeah. What can you just tell us about like a food or like a dish for you that like something like really connects strongly to like some memory of yours that you're fond of? Doesn't have to be meat.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about meat.
No, it probably will be. Yeah, I don't know, like it's hard to say. I don't have like a favorite meal or anything like that. It's more about the company and who it's with. But I guess like a childhood memory or something is I don't know. Like
it doesn't have to get too personal.
No, I mean it's food. It's personal. Yeah. I called it toothpick sauce when I was little. I'd be at my grandmother's house, my grandparents' house in Queens, and it's called brashola, and it's basically thin pieces of meat stuffed with cheese and breadcrumb, and you roll it up, and my grandmother would hold it together with a toothpick, and it would sit in this pot of sauce, and it would just, you just smell it all day. But I couldn't see above like the rim of the stove or the pot, so all I would see were like toothpicks sticking out, and so I knew it was sauce, so I knew the toothpick sauce, and I knew it was delicious, and it just smelled great. And,
sounds really good. Well, mahalo, Bryan. Thank you for joining us today. It's just great to talk story with you, and share your story with other folks too. And mahalo, and look forward to our next Naleo Kaiulu.